Brakes failed during landing. Then an 18-year-old girl saved everyone on board. The pilots were helpless. 170 passengers were screaming. The runway was ending fast. Nobody expected a teenage college student to be their hero. But she knew something nobody else did. Her one move saved them all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The afternoon sun was bright over Denver International Airport as passengers lined up to board Flight 429 to Miami. Among the crowd of travelers was Sarah Martinez, an 18-year-old girl who looked like any other college student heading home for spring break. She wore simple jeans, white sneakers, and a university hoodie. Her backpack was heavy with books and her laptop. To everyone around her, she was just another teenager, probably studying something ordinary like marketing or communications. Nobody knew the truth about Sarah Martinez. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass and smiled. Heading home for break? Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied quietly. What are you studying in college? Sarah hesitated. Aerospace engineering. The woman nodded politely, not really understanding what that meant. That sounds nice, honey. Have a good flight. Sarah walked down the jet bridge and entered the Boeing 737. She found her seat in row 19, squeezed between a businessman and a mother with a baby. The man glanced at her textbook as she pulled it out. Engineering student, he asked. Yes, sir. My daughter just started college too. Business major. What kind of engineering are you doing? Aerospace. I focus on aircraft safety systems. The man smiled. Smart girl. Good luck with your studies. He went back to his phone. To him, Sarah was just a kid with big dreams. He had no idea that this teenager sitting next to him knew more about the plane's mechanical systems than most pilots who flew it. What nobody on Flight 429 knew was that Sarah Martinez was not an ordinary student. At 18, she was the youngest person ever accepted into MIT's Advanced Aerospace program. She had spent the last summer working at an aircraft testing facility, studying brake system failures. Sarah's journey to MIT had not been easy. She grew up in a small town in Texas where most people thought engineering was only for boys. Her high school counselor had told her to choose something more practical. Her own uncle had laughed when she said she wanted to study aerospace engineering. Girls don't become airplane engineers, he had said at a family dinner. That's too complicated for you. But Sarah's father had always believed in her. He was a mechanic who fixed cars but dreamed of understanding aircraft. He would bring home books about planes and they would read them together. When Sarah got into MIT, he cried with pride. You're going to do things I only dreamed about, he told her. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't. At MIT, Sarah worked harder than everyone else. While other students went to parties, she spent weekends in the aviation lab. While others complained about difficult assignments, Sarah asked for extra projects. Her professors noticed her dedication. They saw something special in this young woman who never gave up. Last summer, they recommended her for an internship at the aircraft testing facility. Most students had to wait until their third or fourth year. But Sarah's professors knew she was ready. Her mentor, Dr. James Chen, was one of the world's top experts on aircraft emergency systems. He was tough and demanding. He didn't accept excuses. But he saw Sarah's potential immediately. One evening, after everyone else had left the facility, Dr. Chen called Sarah into his office. I want to show you something, he said. Something most people will never see. He pulled up a simulation on his computer. It showed a complete brake system failure on a commercial aircraft. Sarah watched as the virtual plane couldn't stop on the runway. It crashed at the end, killing everyone on board. This is what happens when both brake systems fail, Dr. Chen said. The pilots do everything they're trained to do. But it's not enough. They die. Then he showed her another simulation. This time, the pilots used a different technique. Asymmetric thrust reverse. Differential spoiler deployment. The plane shook violently. The warning screamed. But it stopped just before the runway ended. This procedure only exists in engineering files, Dr. Chen told her seriously. Pilots don't learn it because aviation authorities say it's too dangerous. The risk of losing control is high. But Sarah, if you ever see a complete brake failure, this is the only solution that works. The only one. Sarah had studied that procedure for weeks after returning to MIT. She had run the calculations hundreds of times. She understood every detail of the physics and engineering behind it. She knew exactly what forces were at play. She knew why it worked. But she never imagined she would actually need to use it. She never imagined that all those late nights studying would one day mean the difference between life and death for 170 people. The plane filled with passengers. Families with children. Business travelers. Elderly couples. A group of college students laughing in the back rows. All of them trusting that this would be just another normal flight. The captain's voice came over the speakers. "Good afternoon, folks. This is Captain Davis. We're looking at smooth weather all the way to Miami. Flight time will be about 3.5 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The plane pushed back from the gate. Sarah opened her textbook and started reading about hydraulic brake systems. The businessman next to her saw the complex diagrams but didn't pay attention. Just another college kid studying boring technical stuff. The takeoff was smooth. The plane climbed into the clear blue sky. Flight attendants came through the cabin with drinks and snacks. Passengers settled in with their phones and tablets. The baby next to Sarah fell asleep. Everything was completely normal for 3 hours. Sarah was deep into her reading when she felt the plane begin its descent toward Miami. The seatbelt sign came on. The flight attendant made the usual announcement about preparing for landing. Sarah looked out the window and saw the city below. The ocean sparkled in the afternoon sun. The plane descended smoothly through the clear air. She could see the airport in the distance. The landing gear came down with a solid thump. Everything seemed perfect. Just a routine landing at one of America's busiest airports. The wheels touched the runway gently. Passengers relaxed, already thinking about getting off the plane. This was the moment when people usually pulled out their phones and unbuckled their seatbelts early. But Sarah felt something wrong immediately. The plane wasn't slowing down. Normally after touchdown, you feel the brakes working. The plane pushes you forward slightly as it slows. But this plane was still going fast. Too fast. She heard the engines roar louder as the pilots tried to slow down. But the plane kept rolling at high speed down the runway. Something was very, very wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Mike Davis and First Officer Jennifer Lopez were living every pilot's nightmare. The moment Captain Davis pressed the brake pedals after landing, nothing happened. The pedals went straight to the floor. No resistance. No brakes. "No brakes," he shouted to Jennifer. "I have no brakes." Jennifer immediately tried the backup system. Nothing. She tried the emergency brake. Nothing. The entire brake system was completely dead. "Tower, this is Flight 429, Captain Davis called on the radio. His voice was calm but urgent. "We have complete brake failure. I repeat, complete brake failure." The control tower responded immediately. "Flight 429, understood. Emergency vehicles are rolling." But both pilots knew the truth. The emergency vehicles couldn't help them. They were in a 75-ton aircraft rolling down the runway at 110 miles per hour with no way to stop. Captain Davis had the thrust reversers at maximum. The spoilers were fully up. But without brakes, these systems alone couldn't stop them in time. Miami's runway was 10,000 feet long. They had already used 4,000 feet. At their current speed, they would run out of runway in less than 30 seconds. Beyond the end of the runway was a highway. Buildings. Fuel tanks. If they couldn't stop, everyone on board would die. In the cabin, passengers started to realize something was wrong. They were still moving too fast. The plane was vibrating more than normal. People looked around nervously. A man across the aisle said loudly, "Why aren't we slowing down?" The captain's voice came over the speakers. Steady but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brake malfunction. Brace for emergency stop. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." Those words sent terror through the cabin. "What does that mean?" someone screamed. "Oh my God, we're going to crash." The woman in front of Sarah started hyperventilating. Her husband tried to calm her, but his own hands were shaking too badly. A teenage boy pulled out his phone with trembling hands, trying to text his parents goodbye. His fingers could barely type. An elderly woman several rows back clutched a photo of her grandchildren. "I was supposed to see them tomorrow," she whispered to no one. "I promised I'd be there." Children started crying. People grabbed their armrests. The businessman next to Sarah dropped his phone. His hands were shaking. All his confidence from earlier was gone. He looked at Sarah with pure terror in his eyes. "We're going to die, aren't we?" he asked. His voice cracked like a child's. The mother holding the baby started praying out loud in Spanish. Tears ran down her face. She kissed her baby's head over and over. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry." Her baby, sensing her mother's fear, started crying. The sound cut through the cabin like a knife. Other parents pulled their children closer, trying to shield them from what was coming. An elderly man in front of them shouted, "Somebody do something. Please, somebody help us." But there was nothing anyone could do. They were passengers. Helpless. Trapped in a metal tube racing toward death at over 100 miles per hour. Flight attendants in their jump seats were pale with fear. They knew exactly how serious this was. They had trained for emergencies. But training didn't prepare you for the moment when you knew you were about to die. Marcus, the flight attendant who had talked to Sarah earlier about his daughter in college, was praying quietly. He was thinking about his daughter. About his wife. About all the things he'd never get to do. Jennifer, another attendant, was crying silently. She was only 24 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Now it was ending on a runway in Miami. Sarah's mind went completely clear. All her training, all her study, all those hours working with Dr. Chen suddenly came into perfect focus. She knew exactly what was happening. Complete hydraulic brake failure. Both primary and backup systems dead. The pilots were using thrust reversers and spoilers, but those alone would never stop the plane in time. She also knew there was one solution. One emergency procedure that could save them. The procedure Dr. Chen had shown her. The one that wasn't in any pilot training manual because it was considered too dangerous. But Sarah knew the physics. She knew the engineering. She knew it would work. The plane had maybe 25 seconds before it ran off the runway and crashed. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "What are you doing?" the businessman yelled. "Sit down." The mother grabbed her arm. "Please, you'll get hurt." Sarah pulled free. "Trust me. I can help." She ran toward the front of the cabin. Other passengers stared at her like she was crazy. This teenage girl running during an emergency while everyone else was strapped in and terrified. A flight attendant shouted at her. "Get back to your seat now." But something in Sarah's face made the attendant hesitate. This wasn't panic. This was purpose. Sarah reached the cockpit door and pounded on it hard. "Let me in. I'm an aerospace engineer. I know how to stop the plane." Inside the cockpit, Captain Davis and First Officer Lopez heard the pounding. But they ignored it. They were fighting the controls, trying everything they knew to slow the aircraft. "We're not going to make it," Jennifer said quietly. The end of the runway was rushing toward them. They had maybe 15 seconds left. Sarah pounded harder. "Asymmetric thrust reverse. Manual override. It's the only way." Those words made Captain Davis freeze. Asymmetric thrust reverse. Manual override. Those weren't normal terms. Those were advanced engineering concepts. He made a split-second decision. They were dead anyway if they did nothing. He reached over and unlocked the cockpit door. Sarah burst in. Captain Davis stared at this teenage girl in jeans and a hoodie who had just invaded his cockpit during a crisis. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Sarah Martinez. MIT Aerospace Engineering. I worked at the aircraft testing facility last summer. I know an emergency procedure that can stop us. But we have 10 seconds. Captain Davis looked at First Officer Lopez. They both knew they were out of options. "Talk fast," he said. Sarah pointed at the engine controls. Her words came out in a rush but were perfectly clear. "Override the thrust reverse limiter on the left engine only. Push it past the safety limit. That creates asymmetric reverse thrust. At the same time, deploy the right side spoilers to maximum but keep the left side spoilers at minimum. The asymmetric thrust will try to spin us left, but the uneven spoilers create opposite force and massive drag. Use right rudder to keep us straight. The combined forces will stop us." Captain Davis stared at her. Everything she described went against every rule of safe flying. Creating asymmetry during landing was exactly what pilots were trained never to do. But the end of the runway was 5 seconds away. He made his choice. "Jennifer, override thrust reverse on engine 1. Full authority." First Officer Lopez's hands flew across the controls. She found the manual override and disabled the safety limiter. She pushed the left engine's thrust reverse far beyond its normal limit. The left engine screamed. The plane immediately started turning left as the asymmetric thrust tried to spin them off the runway. "Right spoilers maximum, left spoilers minimum," Sarah shouted. Captain Davis deployed the spoilers exactly as she said. Right wing spoilers shot up to maximum. Left wing spoilers barely extended. The effect was instant and violent. The plane shook like it was tearing apart. Alarms screamed throughout the cockpit. Every warning light flashed red. The aircraft's computer was yelling that they were about to destroy the plane. But they were slowing down. The asymmetric thrust and the uneven spoilers created massive drag forces. The airspeed indicator dropped rapidly. 100 miles per hour, 90 miles per hour, 80 miles per hour. Captain Davis stomped on the right rudder pedal with all his strength. The plane wanted to spin off the runway, but he fought the controls, keeping the nose pointed straight. More right rudder. Sarah gripped the back of his seat, watching the instruments. Keep it straight. 70 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour. The end of the runway was right in front of them. Emergency vehicles were racing alongside. Fire crews were preparing for the worst. 40 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour. The plane was still moving when the nose crossed the runway end line. But the speed was low enough now. Captain Davis guided them onto the grass safety area beyond the runway. The moment the wheels hit the soft ground, the last of their speed bled away. The plane rolled to a complete stop 40 feet past the end of the runway. Still intact. Still upright. Everyone still alive. For a long moment, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Captain Davis was shaking. His hands were still gripping the controls. First Officer Lopez was breathing hard, staring at the instruments in disbelief. Sarah slowly let go of the seat. Her legs felt weak. Captain Davis turned and looked at her. This 18-year-old girl who had just saved 164 passengers and 6 crew members. How did you know that would work? His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah took a deep breath. Last summer at the testing facility, my mentor showed me simulations of total brake failure. He showed me this procedure. He said it was theoretical, never tested on real planes because it was too dangerous. But the physics is solid. The asymmetric thrust creates rotational force while the uneven spoilers add drag without letting the plane spin out of control. Jennifer Lopez laughed. It sounded slightly crazy. Too dangerous. We just did something that could have ripped the wings off. The official position is that brake failures this complete don't happen, Sarah said. So they don't teach pilots the procedure. But my mentor always said that theory becomes reality when lives are on the line. Captain Davis stood up. He was still shaking. He pulled Sarah into a tight hug. You just saved everyone on this plane, he said. I've been flying for 25 years. I never heard of that procedure. If you hadn't been here, we'd all be dead. The cabin door opened. Flight attendants rushed in, crying and asking if everyone was okay. Behind them, passengers were starting to realize they had stopped. They were safe. Emergency slides deployed. The crew began evacuating everyone quickly in case of fire or structural damage. Sarah tried to slip back into the cabin quietly. But Captain Davis kept his hand on her shoulder. You're staying right here, he said firmly. What you just did needs to be documented. This procedure needs to become part of pilot training. As passengers slid down the emergency exits onto the grass, most of them had no idea what had really happened. They knew it had been a rough landing and they were being evacuated. But they didn't know how close they had come to death. The crew knew. The pilots knew. And as Sarah finally walked down the emergency slide and stood on the grass next to the aircraft, surrounded by fire trucks and emergency vehicles, she felt the full weight of what had just happened. She had used knowledge that most people her age didn't have. She had applied engineering theory in a real crisis. And she had made one decision that saved 170 lives. Federal Aviation Administration investigators arrived within an hour. So did representatives from the National Transportation Safety Board and the Airline's Safety Department. Sarah found herself sitting in a mobile command center, still in her hoodie and jeans, being questioned by people with decades of aviation experience. She explained the procedure step by step. She drew diagrams showing how asymmetric thrust reverse combined with differential spoiler deployment created the drag forces needed to stop the plane. The lead FAA investigator was a man named Robert Chen. He had investigated hundreds of aviation accidents. He listened carefully to Sarah's explanation. How does an 18-year-old college student know about an emergency procedure that experienced pilots have never heard of? He asked. Sarah explained her program at MIT. She explained her internship at the aircraft testing facility. She explained that her mentor, Dr. James Chen, had shown her classified research on catastrophic brake failures because he believed young engineers needed to understand that theory could save lives. Dr. Chen himself flew to Miami that same evening. When investigators told him his student had used his procedure to save a commercial aircraft, he broke down crying. I showed her that simulation because I wanted her to understand that engineering isn't just about building things, he told them. It's about solving problems that shouldn't exist but sometimes do. I never imagined she would actually use it. But she remembered. She understood it well enough to apply it under pressure. That's not just knowledge. That's genius. The story spread fast. News of the teenage hero who saved the plane reached every major news outlet within hours. 18-year-old student saves plane with one move became the headline that captured the world's attention. By evening, Sarah's story was trending on every social media platform. Millions of people were sharing it, commenting on it, calling her a hero. Major news networks wanted exclusive interviews. Good Morning America called. CNN called. The Today Show called. Everyone wanted to talk to the teenage girl who had done the impossible. Reporters swarmed the airport wanting interviews. Sarah's phone exploded with messages from classmates and professors. Her roommate at MIT texted, "You're on every news channel." What happened? Her academic advisor called. "Sarah, I just saw the news. I can't believe you were on that plane. Are you okay?" Even the president of MIT released a statement. Sarah Martinez represents the best of what MIT stands for. Brilliant minds. Courage under pressure. And the application of knowledge to save lives. We are incredibly proud of her. Sarah's parents, watching the news from their home in Texas, couldn't believe their daughter had been on that plane, much less in the cockpit saving everyone. Her mother saw the news alert on her phone first. Brake failure on Miami flight, teen hero saves 170 lives. She clicked it and saw Sarah's name. She screamed. Sarah's father came running. When he saw the news, his legs gave out. He sat down hard on the couch, staring at the TV where his daughter's photo was now displayed. "That's our baby," he whispered. "That's our Sarah." They tried calling her immediately but the call wouldn't go through. Too many people were trying to reach Sarah. Her phone was overwhelmed. Finally, hours later, Sarah was able to call them. Her mother answered on the first ring. She couldn't speak. She just cried. Deep, shaking sobs of relief and terror and pride all mixed together. Her father took the phone. His voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah," was all he could say at first. Just her name. Like he was confirming she was real. That she was alive. Her mother called her, crying so hard she couldn't speak for several minutes. Her father, normally quiet and calm, broke down when he heard her voice. But Sarah deflected the hero label every time reporters asked. "I just applied what I learned," she said. "The real heroes are my professors who taught me to think about failure scenarios. The real hero is Dr. Chen who trusted me with that knowledge. The real heroes are Captain Davis and First Officer Lopez who had the courage to trust a teenager and the skill to execute an incredibly difficult maneuver under extreme pressure." The investigation into the brake failure revealed a shocking truth. A microscopic defect in a hydraulic valve had created a cascade failure that killed both primary and backup brake systems at the same time. It was exactly the kind of one-in-a-million malfunction that redundant safety systems were designed to prevent. The defect had existed since the plane was built 2 years earlier. It was invisible to normal inspections. It had been waiting for the exact combination of temperature, pressure, and stress that finally triggered complete system failure. The aircraft had made thousands of safe landings before that one critical failure. Engineers examining the failed parts were shocked. Such a tiny defect, impossible to see with normal testing, had almost killed 170 people. The FAA immediately issued emergency directives. Every aircraft with similar hydraulic components was grounded for inspection. Hundreds of planes worldwide were checked. The investigation concluded that without Sarah's intervention, Flight 429 would have left the runway at approximately 70 miles per hour. It would have hit the highway and buildings beyond. Most or all passengers and crew would have died. Her quick thinking had prevented one of the worst aviation disasters in recent history. The aviation community began discussing whether Sarah's emergency procedure should be added to pilot training. It was controversial because it violated so many safety principles. But the fact was undeniable. It had worked exactly as the engineering predicted. Within 6 months, the FAA added a modified version of the procedure to emergency training for commercial pilots. It required considerable skill to manage the asymmetric forces without losing control. But it could be done. Sarah returned to MIT as a celebrity. But she tried to maintain her normal student life. Her professors treated her with new respect. Not because she had been on TV, but because she had proven the real-world value of theoretical knowledge. Other students looked at her differently now. Some with awe. Some with curiosity. Many wanted to hear every detail of the story. Sarah found the attention overwhelming. She often studied alone in the engineering library, hiding among the technical journals where people left her alone. Dr. Chen arranged for her to present a paper at an aerospace engineering conference. She discussed the importance of teaching unconventional solutions alongside standard procedures. Her presentation was attended by industry leaders, military engineers, and safety investigators. She stood at the podium in front of people with decades more experience than her. And she explained with quiet confidence why theoretical knowledge mattered. Why studying edge cases was essential. And why young engineers should never be dismissed simply because of their age. Captain Davis and First Officer Lopez visited Sarah at MIT several months later. They wanted to thank her personally away from the media attention. They brought her a gift. A piece of metal from the aircraft, removed during the investigation and mounted on a plaque. The inscription read, "To Sarah Martinez, who taught us that solutions sometimes come from the youngest voices. With gratitude from the crew and passengers of Flight 429. Sarah hung it in her dorm room. She would touch it before exams or when she doubted herself. It reminded her that knowledge wasn't abstract. It was powerful and real. The incident changed Sarah's career path. She focused entirely on aircraft safety systems and emergency procedures. She worked with engineers to improve brake system designs. She consulted with training organizations. She eventually co-authored a paper with Dr. Chen that became required reading in aerospace programs worldwide. Flight 429 had shown her that engineering knowledge wasn't just theory. It was practical power that could mean the difference between disaster and survival. The mother who had been sitting next to her on the plane tracked Sarah down through the airline. Her name was Maria Gonzalez. She sent Sarah a handwritten letter. "You were sitting right next to me and my baby," Maria wrote. "I had no idea you were the person who would save us. When you ran to the cockpit, I thought you were panicking. I tried to stop you. But you weren't running away from danger. You were running toward it. Because of you, my daughter will grow up. She'll go to school. She'll have a life. Thank you for being brave when the rest of us were frozen in fear." Years later, after graduating at the top of her class from MIT and beginning her career as a safety engineer at the NTSB, Sarah would sometimes think back to that moment in the cockpit. She thought about how Captain Davis had to decide whether to trust a teenage girl's knowledge over his 25 years of experience. She thought about how close they had come to disaster. How many small things had to align perfectly for her to be on that specific flight. To have that specific knowledge. To have the courage to act. She thought about Maria and her baby. About the businessman who had dismissed her studies. About the elderly couple a few rows up. About the college students in the back. About the flight attendants. About all 170 people who went home to their families that night because engineering knowledge met aviation crisis at exactly the right moment. The story of Flight 429 became a case study in aviation schools and engineering programs. An example of how specialized knowledge could come from unexpected sources. How theoretical understanding combined with courage could solve problems that seemed impossible. Sarah Martinez, the 18-year-old girl in a hoodie who saved everyone with one move, became a symbol. A symbol of why diverse voices belonged in every field. Why young people's knowledge should be respected alongside experience. And why the answer to impossible problems sometimes came from the person nobody expected. Standing on the grass that day, watching investigators examine the aircraft, Sarah thought about her professors who had pushed her to understand not just how systems worked, but how they failed. She thought about Dr. Chen who had trusted her with knowledge that was supposed to stay theoretical. And she thought about all the students like her. Young people carrying backpacks full of books. Dismissed as typical teenagers. Never suspected of having extraordinary knowledge that might someday save lives. The world saw college students as people still learning. Still becoming. Not yet ready to solve real problems. But Sarah knew differently now. Sometimes the person who could save everyone was the one nobody expected. The one who looked too young to know anything important. But who had studied hard enough to know the one thing that mattered when everything else failed. The brake failure on Flight 429 had been catastrophic. The kind of emergency that should never happen. The kind that conventional procedures couldn't solve. But Sarah Martinez had made one move. Applied one procedure. Connected one piece of theory to one moment of crisis. And turned certain death into survival. She showed that the difference between tragedy and triumph could be measured in knowledge, courage, and the willingness to trust that sometimes the youngest voice in the room knew exactly what needed to be done. As she finally called her parents that evening to explain why she'd be late getting home, she had a story to tell. A story about textbooks and engineering in one critical moment when everything she had studied suddenly mattered more than anyone could have imagined. Her father listened in silence. Then he said something she would never forget. "We raised you to be smart. But you chose to be brave. That's what saved all those people." Sarah realized he was right. Knowledge had given her the solution. But courage had given her the will to act on it. To run toward danger when everyone else was frozen in fear. To trust herself when doubt would have been easier. And in that combination of knowledge and courage, 170 lives had been saved. By one move. From one young woman who refused to be dismissed simply because of her age.